Nice to see you again.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome, glad you're here. I'm Richard Zauft. I'm the Dean of the College of Art and Design here at Lesley University, and I want to welcome you to tonight's Strauch-Mosse Visiting Artist Lecture with poet Richard Blanco. On behalf of the Lesley University students, faculty, and staff, and our community of friends and partners, we are delighted to welcome Richard Blanco to deliver this spring version of the 2019 Strauch-Mosse Visiting Artist Lecture. So, to tell you a little bit about the background before we get to introductions, the Strauch-Mosse Lectures, presented each year, began in 2008 and are made possible by the generosity of Lesley trustee Hans Strauch. This endowed lecture series enables the university to bring in national and international award-winning artists to campus in support of Lesley's commitment to artistic and cultural inquiry and to help advance the university's mission toward diverse cultural and artistic literacy. So please join me in thanking Hans Strauch for his generosity and foresight in establishing this significant series of talks that allows our community to hear from the most accomplished artists of our time. Hans, thank you. Past speakers have included mixed media artist Zhu Bing and Suzanne Lacey, poet and playwright Derek Wolcott, jazz musician and apartheid activist Hugh Masekela, performance and installation artists Ann Hamilton and Nick Cave, dancer choreographers Judith Jameson and Twyla Tharp, graphic designer Luba Lakova, photographer Carrie Mae Weems, novelists Edwidge Danicat and Colson Whitehead, and actor Christopher Jackson, to mention just some of them. Lesley has changed significantly since its beginnings as a school and trained elementary school teacher. While teacher education remains a key component of Lesley's mission, courses and programs in the arts are now embedded in the 4 colleges at Lesley University. We explore diverse forms of artistic expression. These words reside in Lesley's mission statement and appropriately positions creativity as a central currency and common denominator in all of our endeavors. Please join me for the reception and book signing with Richard Blanco upstairs in the Washburn Lounge immediately following the talk. Thank you very much. To introduce Lindsay O'Neill, who will in turn introduce tonight's guest. Lindsay is a second-year student in Lesley's MFA program in creative writing. She is a poet and a native of Boston. Lindsay.
Good evening. I'm Lindsay O'Neill, and I'm pleased to introduce this evening's Strauch-Mosse Visiting Artist Lecture, poet Richard Blanco. Richard Blanco is the 5th presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history, the youngest first Latino immigrant and gay person to serve in such a role. Born in Madrid to Cuban exile parents and raised in Miami, the negotiation of cultural identity and place characterized his body of work. He is the author of the poetry collections Looking for the Gulf Motel, Directions to the Beach of the Dead, and City of 100 Fires. The poetry chapbooks Matters of the Sea, One Today, and Boston Strong. A children's book, his inaugural poem One Today, illustrated by Dave Pilkey, and Boundaries, a collaboration with photographer Jacob Hessler. His latest book of poems, How to Love a Country, both interrogates the American narrative, past and present, and celebrates the still unkept promise of its ideals. He has also authored the memoirs The Prince of Los Cucuyos, A Miami Childhood, and for all of us, one today, an inaugural poet's journey. Blanco's many honors include the Agnes Lynch Starrett Poetry Prize from the University of Pittsburgh Press, the Penn Beyond Margins Award, the Patterson Poetry Prize, a Lambda Literary Award, and 2 Maine Literary Awards. He has been a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow and received honorary doctorates from Macalester College, Colby College, and the University of Rhode Island. He has been featured on CBS Sunday Morning and NPR's Fresh Air. The Academy of American Poets named him its first education ambassador in 2015. Blanco has continued to write occasional poems for organizations and events, such as the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, whether speaking as the Cuban Blanco or the American Richard, the homebody or the world traveler, the shy boy or the openly gay man, the engineer or the presidential inaugural poet, Blanco's writings possess a story-rich quality that illuminates the human spirit. His work asks us universal questions we all ask ourselves on our own journeys. Where am I from? Where do I belong? Who am I in this world? Please join me in welcoming Richard Blanco.
Good evening, buenas noches. Thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, everybody, for that makes this evening possible. Part of the reason I like to. Is this on, by the way? It's supposed to be on. Okay. Part of the reason I like to use this quote is to remind us how it takes a village to put something like this together. So many different moving parts, but also to let us come together as a village and to enjoy art, literature, all the many different disciplines that this wonderful lecture series presents in community, because ultimately something different and magical happens when we do this in community. I know that happens for me, as writing especially can be such a solitary endeavor, and when I get to do this, what I do feels suddenly alive. It feels suddenly real. It's almost like I'm not sure home is really done until this kind of circularity happens, this kind of feedback there, or closing of a loop rather. So it really is a treat for me, and you're all a gift to me tonight. So thank you for that. As you can imagine, serving as presidential inaugural poet, or PIP, as I like to call myself, changed my life on a very, first of all, on a very personal level. Reading a poem to 1 million people in the National Mall, and God knows how many other millions of Americans, sort of gives you a newfound sense of your place at the American table, right? I feel like I had a ribbon in a way, and finally, as I turned to my mother, actually at the inauguration, that said, Mama, I think we're finally Americanos. If this is, you look at Obama and Beyonce over there, it's gotta be. But for many years, that of course, even at the ripe age of 44, when I was then, I still believe that part of me was not American. That my narrative was not American. That I wasn't really 100% American. I always thought that this is what it meant to be an American, right? And the irony, of course, is my last name, as opposed to the white family. I think I remember when I became a U.S. citizen, I asked my mother if I could change my name to Duke White, and she said absolutely not. But but the idea being that I grew up thinking that that's ultimately what it meant to be American. That quiet family sitting around the TV, all nice and well behaved, and unlike family night, the Blancos, which always turns into a lot of dancing and spandex. And so like that, it went on for years, and really that is part of my questioning and my work, my entire body of work in some ways or another. And so in some ways, the inauguration was really sort of this culminating moment in sort of realizing that my story as a little chubby gay kid from a working class immigrant family from a suburb of Miami, that was part of the American story. right? That my mother's life and story as a Cuban exile who grew up in a dirt floor home, that was part of the American narrative. That each one of our stories, as is defined by democracy, is part of our narrative. That the idea of our motto, out of the many one, e pluribus, excuse my Latin, that ideally that is still what we're striving for, right? The idea that no narrative matters more than the other, but that we're striving towards one narrative that includes us all. And so that moment really, that was really just such a wonderful sort of, like I said, culminating moment. And realizing, of course, that we're not there yet, right? I mean, and that democracy is a work in progress, and it's something that may take 3 steps forward and 4 steps back, and 2 steps forward and 28 steps back, and 10 steps forward, et cetera, if you know where I'm going with that. But in any case, nonetheless, that, you know, that it is our duty. It is our duty to continue to participate in that democracy in whatever ways we can. I, as a poet, et cetera, everybody else, in whatever ways they can, right? That we need to contribute a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter, whatever we can to continue writing that narrative and that story. So I'd like to just take us back to a moment to that inauguration, because this is really where this new book that I'll present today begins. And most of the work that is in there begins with this moment in some ways. And I'm just going to read a little bit of prose first from the memoir that Lesley had mentioned. That sort of is my frame of mind while I'm sitting here waiting to be called up to the podium. People always say that, or always ask me, sort of, we feel like we're in a different space in our country right now. And I think, of course, that is true, but I think it's hopefully, and I'm still sort of the Pollyanna of the world, but I think it's perhaps just part of the process that we need to work out, right? We were in a different state of mind, but I think with some of the things we're seeing now, I've always been there, right? So we're still striving for that story to be made. And so I don't mean to read this in terms of let's overly romanticize where America has been. American history, as I'll read some poems of, has not been all that great, right? And there are parts of it that there are chapters we want to erase, right? But there are still in some ways, hopefully chapters that get us to write something, to get us to change the story, right? Or realize we need to change the story. In that moment, I feel America standing as one, putting differences aside and taking a deep collective breath. We pay tribute to something far bigger and more important than any one of us. And I truly feel like one of us, one of we, the people, and the echoes of the presidents and other speeches. I embrace America in a way I never had or thought I could, feeling for the first time that I truly belong to one country. Not an imaginary ideal from QV or nostalgic Cuba floating in the sea of my parents' memories, but a real, tangible place that is mine, was mine all along. Senator Schumer introduces me and calls me up to the podium. My mother squeezes my shoulder. I stand more confident than I imagined I would or could be, transfixed by the moment that is no longer about me or my home or my glory, but about our country. Still, I'm surprised when the president and vice president stand up to greet me and shake my hand on the way to the podium. They both whisper something in my ear that I can't make out. But their gracious gestures speak silently to my heart. Silent, as if saying, Richard, here is your country. This is your story. I step up to the podium, look out over the crowd, a patchwork quilt of lives, of stories spread across our ground, under our sky, beneath our one sun. I take it all in as I take one deep breath, then another. This is for them. This is for us. For all of us, I think to myself, and begin speaking into our wind. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, America, one today. One sun rose on us today, kindled over our shores, peeking over the Smokies, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains, then charging over the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one a story, told by our silent gestures moving behind our windows. My face, your face, millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, food stands, apples, limes, and oranges, arrayed like rainbows begging our praise. Silver trucks, heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us, on our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives, to teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years, so I could write this poem for us today. All of us, as vital as the one light we move through. The same light on blackboards with lessons for the day, equations to solve, history to question, or atoms imagine. The I have a dream, we keep dreaming, or the impossible vocabulary of sorrow that won't explain. The empty deaths of 20 children marked absent today and forever. Many prayers, but one light. Breathing color into stained glass windows, life into the faces of bronze statues, warmth into the steps of our museums and park benches as mothers watch their children slide into the day. One ground, our ground, rooting us to every stalk of corn, every head of wheat sown by sweat and hands gleaning coal or planting windmills in deserts and hilltops that keep us warm. Hands digging trenches, hands riding pipes and cables, hands as worn as my father's, cutting sugarcane so my brother and I could have books and shoes. The dust of our farms and deserts, our cities and plains mingled by one wind, our breath. Breathe. Hear it. Through the day's gorgeous din of honking cabs, buses launching down avenues, the symphony of footsteps, guitars, and screeching subways, the unexpected songbird on your clothesline. Hear squeaky playground swings, trains whistling or whispers across cafe tables. Hear the doors we open all day for each other, saying, hello, shalom, buongiorno, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias. In the language my mother taught me, in every language spoken into one wind, carrying our lives without prejudice, as these words break from my lips. One sky since the Appalachians and Sierras claimed their majesty, and the Mississippi and Colorado worked their way to the sea. Thank the work of our hands, weaving steel into bridges, finishing one more report for the boss on time, stitching another wound or uniform. The first brushstroke on a portrait, or the last floor on the Freedom Tower jutting into a sky that yields to our resilience. One sky, toward which we sometimes lift our eyes, tired from work. Some days guessing at the weather of our lives. Some days giving thanks for love that loves you back. Sometimes praising a mother who knew how to give, or forgiving a father who couldn't give what you wanted. Still, we head home. Through the gloss of rain and weight of snow, or the plum blush of dusk, but always, always always under one sky, our sky, and always one moon, like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one country. All of us, facing the stars and hope, a new constellation, still waiting for us to map it, still waiting for us to name it together. So aside from my own, I don't know that you can separate my own personal transformation from my aesthetic transformation as well, because one's life and one's work when it comes to poetry are quite a bit of a blur. But of course, the experience of the inauguration obviously did change my creativity, did change my sense of what a poem can and should do in the world, sort of made me think about my civic role, my role as a civic poet, or my duty as a civic poet. Also think about just what like sort of the idea of a poem and social consciousness. I don't consider myself a political poet per se, that's a really loaded word, but just how is poetry occupying public space, right? And because I got to experience that, and how does it need to? I mean, how are the arts, and how is, in my case, particularly poetry, part of something that can create another dialogue, part can stimulate another conversation, can get us out, not get us out, but at least can be a catalyst. I don't, as I always like to say, I don't think a poem can change the world. That's absolutely silly. I think a poem can change a person, and people can change the world, right? And I think that's part of what the arts do. The ripple effects are amazing. And so I was just starting to think about, how can I step out of my own comfort zone? How can I still carry this idea and question of home and belonging and identity and all the rest as we move beyond the presidency that I was part of, and sort of maybe again keep on writing that story, so to speak. So the book is made up of a mosaic of 3 different kinds of poems, occasional poems or commemorative poems, much like the presidential inaugural poem, though you can't beat that audience as far as numbers are concerned. It's funny what's happened, just different organizations that call me to write occasional poems, or poems, for example, to tell the story of the old Bacardi family in Cuba, poems to tell poems for Freedom to Marry, which I'll read tonight, Freedom to Marry, about the poems to support marriage equality. So all these kinds of, I just love that. What I loved about the inauguration is it's not, as I always say, it isn't about me, it was about poetry. The way it just brought, that moment brings poetry into the lives of people that would ordinarily never think about bringing poetry to something like, if you're at the FDIC, at the USDA, like they love all my court poems. It was great. Anyway, it's part of like just being that experience of thinking, how could a poem occupy the world? How can I write poetry that occupies public spaces? I like to see it a little bit differently. And so that's one kind of poem. The other one, of course, still autobiographical poems based on lives of my parents, my own sort of yearning for place and belonging. And then a good third of the book are trastic poems from a project that I think Winston mentioned that was called Boundaries, and it was 12 photographs and 12 poems on the theme of boundaries. And not just physical boundaries, but psychological, class boundaries, all these other kinds of boundaries that again are part of the narrative we're trying to work out. So I'll begin with one of the trastic poems. This is the collaboration, obviously give great credit to Jacob Hessler, the photographer of the book. He's a modern, what they call a contemporary landscape photographer, and so I love his work. This is a mid-art song because there's no people in it. That doesn't make me like antisocial. It's just like, right, like as a poet, you like immediately want to inhabit the space with a narrative. And so it was really a great collaboration in that sense. So this is a photo of the wall in Tijuana. The separation between the U.S.-Mexico border. which I find I love this photo because I love the absurdity of the idea that you're going to separate water, right? With this kind, at least with this kind of structure, right? And so just the absurdity of, especially when it comes to southern United States, the absurdity that there even is a border. If there is one, it's about 800 miles wide, a region that shares a history, like many more hundreds of years older than our own country, right? Of people that have such a long intermixing of so many, on so many levels. And so this idea that, oh, I'm swimming in the United States. Really? Like anybody who's ever visited obviously knows what I'm talking about. But so this poem sort of speaks to that. It's pointed at Trump, but I want it to be more than Trump, because I think what I wanted this poem to do is also implicate ourselves in this. Realize that we all build walls in some ways, right? We can all be guilty of that in some ways. Walls from ourselves, from our truest selves, walls around keeping us from others, walls of other kinds, walls of class, walls of intellectual superiority, walls of all sorts, right? So this is kind of that person you don't want to be, right? So let's look at it that way. It's that neighbor we don't want to be. Dreaming a wall. He hates his neighbor's flowers, claims his are redder, bluer, wider than theirs. Believes his bees work harder, his soil richer, blacker. He hears birds sing sweeter in his trees, taller and fuller too, but not enough to screen out the nameless faces next door that he calls liars. Thieves would steal his juicier fruit, kill for his wetter rain and brighter sun. He keeps a steely eye on them, mocks the too cheery colors of their homes, too small and too close to his own, painted white with room to spare. He curses the giggles of their children, always barefoot in the yard, chasing their yappy dogs. He wishes them dead, closes his blinds, refuses to let light from their windows pollute his eyes with their lives, denies their silhouettes dining at the kitchen table, laughing in the living room, the goodnight kisses through every bedroom. Slouched in his couch, grumbling over the news he dismisses as fake, he changes the channel to an old cowboy western. Amid the clamor of gunshots, he dozes off, thinking of his dream, where he stakes a line between him and all his neighbors, stabs the ground as he would their chests, forms a footing cast in blood-red earth, bends steel bars as he would their bones with his bare fists, and buries them in concrete. Mortar mixed thick with anger, each brick laid heavy with revenge. He smiles as he finishes the last course, high enough to imagine them more miserable and lonely than him, alone, inside his wall, sitting on his greener lawn, breathing his fresher air under his bluer, oh, so much more bluer sky. So, can you a little water, some agua, water? There's a lot of weather for that. So, this is, oh, okay. Thanks. This is a photo, two photos of my mother, obviously, well, not obviously, but yes, my mother. One from old photograph from Cuba, thanks. From Cuba, one of my favorite photo of her, actually, and one with her at the inauguration. So she was the one I chose to sit right beside me at the platform, because in a way, my mother is more of an American than I could ever be. For the act of leaving her country, leaving her entire family behind, her parents, 8 brothers and sisters, every aunt and uncle, every niece and nephew, And so this poem is sort of an occasional poem, but it's sort of a hybrid poem because it's very autobiographically based, or at least refers to my mother's journey and thinking of her in that context, looking at, sort of placing ourselves in my mother's emotional shoes as a way of looking back at our own country and thinking about what we were raised here or born here and raised here take for granted, and how an immigrant sort of reminds us and holds the country up to those ideals on that par, thinking about what we could lose. So I'm basically asking, if we did have to get up off our seats tonight, and in 24 hours, pack one bag and say goodbye to every living relative and leave everything you ever knew behind with the understanding that you would never see it again. How might we fight for what we need to fight for a little bit more? How might we speak up for what we need to speak up for a little more? How might we love what we need to love a little bit more? How might we have conversations that we need to have? And my mother, I think, is always reminding me of that. And this poem, I think, is a tribute in that way. Mother country, madre patria. To love a country as if you've lost one. 1968. My mother leaves Cuba for America, a scene I imagine as standing in her place. 1 foot inside a plane destined for a country she knew only as a name, a color on a map, or glossy photos from drugstore magazines. Her other foot anchored to the platform of her patria, her hand clutched around one suitcase, taking only what she needs most. Hand-colored photographs of her family, her wedding veil, the doorknob of her house, a jar of dirt from her backyard, goodbye letters she won't open for years. The sorrowful drone of engines, one last deep breath of familiar air she'll take with her. One last glimpse at all she ever owned. The palm trees wave goodbye as she steps onto the plane. The mountains shrink from their eyes as she lifts off into another life to love a country as if you've lost one. I hear her. Once upon a time, reading picture books over my shoulder at bedtime, both of us learning English, sounding out words as strange as the talking animals and fair-haired princesses in their pages. I tips your first attempts at macaroni and cheese, but with chorizo and peppers. Her shame over Thanksgiving turkeys, always dry, but countered by her perfect pork and meat and garlic yuca. I smell the rain of those mornings huddled as one under one umbrella, waiting for the bus to her 10-hour days at the cash register. And at night, the zzz of her sewing her own blouses and quinceañera dresses for her grown nieces still in Cuba, guessing at their sizes. And the gowns she saw the neighbors to save for rusty white sedan, no hubcaps, no air conditioning, sweating all the way through her first vacation to Florida theme parks to love a country as if you've lost one. As if we're you on a plane departing from America forever. Clouds closing like curtains on your country, the last scene in which you're a madman, scribbling the names of your favorite flowers, trees, and birds you'd never see again. Your address and phone number you'd never use again. The color of your father's eyes and your mother's hair, terrified you could somehow, someday, forget these. To love a country. As if I was my mother last spring, hobbling, insisting I help her climb all the way up to the US Capitol, as if she were here before you today instead of me, explaining her tears, her cheeks pink as the cherry blossoms coloring the air that day, when she stopped, turned to me, and said, "You know me, I've been thinking. It isn't where you're born that matters. matters. It's where you choose to die. That is your country. I forgot to mention that the White House asked me to write 3 poems, so that was the 3rd poem. So that's what, did I mention that? No. So it's sort of an occasional poem and an autobiographical poem. So that's kind of a hybrid. And so my mother leaves us with an interesting question that's both sort of literal and figurative, right? Where is that last resting place, and how does one know one's nationality, and what does one claim as home? And she's gotten to a point of her life where she's lived more of her life in the United States than in Cuba. And she hasn't chosen this country. I mean, at first it was a choice she made blindly, but that's a choice she makes consciously, right? And that's always stayed with me. So this is my, I can't change it. Wiggle around here. This is my, you read a mother's poem, you gotta read a dad's poem. Right? So my dad lost in a different way, not necessarily family, but he lost his, I guess, for a man of that generation, of that age, somewhat exile sort of emasculated him in a way. I mean, here's this man, right, who's supposed to man a house, to give up all his dreams, those ideas of supporting his family, and to just survive, right? And I think it spent him a little bit. I think it made him change his whole plan, right? It made him change his whole, it really messed with his psyche. I had to give up, I think, in a lot of dreams and a lot of plans that he had, and he got lost in a different way than my mother. In a weird way, my mother still had this illusion of a family in Cuba, this thing that, in a weird way, that loss kept her going, that fixed point of loss. My dad was a little more fluid in, like, what do I do with this world that I'm in, with this country? And so this poem is an attempt to, it's one of the autobiographical poems of the book, and it's an attempt to sort of capture some of that, and in a way to thank him, ultimately. It's a poem of praise. That's him, of course, as a toddler, my older brother, and the other member of the family, the plastic-covered sofa, and immigrants. This one I'm proud to say was appeared in. It's like a date that I'll never forget as well. Appeared in the New Yorker on February 11th for my birthday, which is the 15th. So first one ever in that magazine. My father in English. First half of his life lived in Spanish, the long syntax of Las Montañas that lined his village, the rhyme of sol with his soul, a Cuban alma that swayed with Las Palmas, the sharp rhythm of his machete cutting through caña, the syllables of his canarios that sung into la brisa of the island poem. He left to spell out the second half of his life in English. In the vernacular of New York City, steel, sleet, and glass. And the brick factory where he learned to polish steel 12 hours a day. Enough to save enough to buy a used Spanish-English dictionary, he kept bedside like a Bible. Studied 15 new words after his prayers each night, and practiced them on us the next day. Buenos dias, indeed, my family. Indeed, más café. Have a good day today, indeed. And again, in the evening, gracias to my bella wife, indeed, for dinner. ¿Hiciste tu home? Indeed. La vida es indeed difícil. Indeed did indeed become his favorite word, which, like the rest of his new life, he never quite grasped. Overused and misused, often to my embarrassment. Yet the word I most learned to love and know him through. Indeed, the exile who tried to master the language he chose to master him. Indeed, the husband who refused to say I love you in English to my mother. Indeed, the man who died without true translation. Indeed, meaning in fact and effecto, meaning in reality, the hecho, meaning to say now what I always meant to tell him in both languages. Thank you. Gracias. For surrendering the past tense of your life, that I may conjugate myself here in the present of this country. In truth, así es. Indeed. So, when I think someone mentioned that moment of reading the poem at the U.S. Embassy was in a way such another sort of life-changing moment in the sense that, as you just saw, the two poems from my parents, in a sense, I think that part of my motivation in writing my that's not the right word, psychological, that's a whole other influence. My psychological influence or motivation in writing was in some ways to attempt some kind of healing for my parents, right? That art, I felt somehow if I wrote their stories, if something would happen, if I understood them, maybe they'd understand themselves. If I documented what their lives were about, that their lives wouldn't have been in vain, that these troubles and sacrifices they went through would somehow be honored in some way. And to get to do that, ironically, through poetry, was a great sense of closure, and an amazing moment that in some ways was even more emotional for me and more personal than obviously the inauguration. It was a big closing of a long chapter in my life. Ironically, I took my mother to Washington and my partner to Cuba because it really was a threshold moment. That was like sort of the end of her story, and this was the beginning of my new life that was supposed to happen in Cuba with my partner Mark. I was afraid he'd hate Cubans in Cuba, but anyway. So I just want to sort of comment on that because again, here's another moment where poetry is becoming part of a ceremony, part of something that matters, right? Part of something that matters publicly, I should say. And how it can be used in such a way and bring another conversation into that moment. That also stems, it's an occasional poem, but it also stems from just a very personal space. This is another sort of unresolved border that we're again returning to again and again. And speaking more about this absurdity of borders and immigration policy, especially when it relates to obviously the U.S.-Mexico border. I don't know about all of you, but I've been hearing about this immigration issue since I was a kid, and I'm pretty old. So I just can't understand how we cannot think that there isn't a fair and equitable solution to this issue. And I'm sorry, both sides of the aisle, because this book tries to be a little more even-handed. This is the political ping pong ball that we have just got to stop, right? It's something that, and the only people that are suffering are the destitute and the poor, as usual, as history does over and over and over again, and just use and misuse people for the sake of political gain or political posturing or whatever else you might have. Or at least, I don't want to say completely in that sense, but also not just understanding the real issues, okay? Sorry, I feel like I'm running for office sometimes when I read this book, but I mean, I do have a different perspective, not a different, I'm sure there's people here that I share a lot of this perspective with, but I don't have a one side of the border perspective on this. I've lived in Guatemala, I've lived in these countries. It's more complex than even the media makes it out to seem, right? It's like there's more people need to be held accountable for this than we're held accountable. And so the river's gonna do that for us. in this poem. This is obviously one of Jacob, it's really washed out. What is it, this name? Beautiful, like emerald sort of green color. When presented, this is the Rio Grande, and it's part of the Rio that forms the border with U.S. Mexico. And so I thought the only way I can really speak to this at this moment is to just let the river let us have it. Let the river let humanity have it. Again, the absurdity of borders, and thinking about how we're creating these artificial divides historically, let's face it, for the gain, for power and wealth, right? And so, anyway, we'll let the river have it. So this is in the voice of the river. Complaint of el Rio Grande, for Elin Barbieri. I was meant for all things to meet, to make the clouds pause in the mirror of my waters, to be home to falling rain that finds its way to me, to turn eons of loveless rock into lovesick pebbles and carry them as humble gifts back to the sea, which brings life back to me. I felt the sun flare, praised each star flocked about the moon long before you did. I breathed air you'll never breathe, listened to songbirds long before you could speak their names, before you dug your oars in me, before you created the gods that created you. Then countries, your invention, maps jigsawing the world into colored shapes, caged in bold lines to say you're here, not there, you're this, not that, to say yellow isn't red, red isn't black, black is not white, to say mine, not ours, to say war, and believe that life's worth is relative. You named me, big river, drew me, blue, thick to divide, to say spick and Yankee, to say wetback and gringo. You split me in two, half of me, us, the rest, them. But I wasn't meant to drown children. Hear mother's cries, never meant to be your geography, a line, a border, a murderer. I was meant for all things to meet. The mirrored clouds and sun's tingle, bird songs and the quiet moon, the wind and its dust, the rush of mountain rain and us, blood that runs in you is water flowing in me. Both life, the truth we know, to be one in another. So this poem was written, I mentioned it briefly, it was written for freedomandmary.org. It was written maybe a year before the Supreme Court ruling, or I should say it was asked just before it, but no, it was the big ruling came later. But Freedom from Mary, for those of you that aren't familiar, it was really a very important organization led by Evan Wolfson that changed the languaging of what we were fighting for, right? And it approached it much like a poem, but more out of the love and empathy angle than what, or at least that was said, at least a little bit different than the rhetoric that came before. And I think it made all the difference in the world. And so to think about how language can shape the world, right? That's what poets do all the time. Right? So to write this poem was, they asked me to write it, and they were for their 10-year anniversary. And then they were going to produce it into, it was known that they were going to produce it into a short film, and you can YouTube it if you'd like. It's called Until We Could. And those are clips from the scene from the movie. I had no creative input in the film, which is, I thought it was. It was really interesting. As I pictured Ryan Gosling and like Brad Pitt like making out, you know. So it's really interesting because I should have probably not had creative power, but I'm just going to share this and geeking out for a moment on for you creative writing students. It was so cool to be able to write something that you knew was going to be a movie. So it was like sort of like a screenplay in a way. It was this thing that you're imagining and you're writing, and it gave me a different way to think about writing a poem, as if people are really moving in the room, as if things are really happening right before me. To think about a poem, it's a poem cinematography, if that makes sense. So that's part of it. And again, what is an occasional poem and what is a commemorative poem if you don't bring yourself to it? So I think we make that mistake when we think about commemorative or occasional poems, that it's about the occasion or it's about the organization. It's really about you as the writer at the end of the day. What do you feel about these things? Because the audience will care about what you feel, or you try to find a connection point, something I care deeply about, and I know my audience will care deeply about. In this case, this poem is dedicated and obviously very based on my relationship with my partner of 28,000 years, who I've had to tell everybody we're married because I feel like we're married, and I've just haven't had time to get married. And but he just proposed to me on last Saturday. So this poem kind of predicted it in a way. And so you wouldn't know that, but it was obviously based on something of my life with him, right? And so, even though, okay, I'm going just geeking out. What was going to say about this? Yeah. Until we could, for Mark. I knew it then, when we first found our eyes and everything around us, even the din and smoke of the city, disappeared, leaving us alone as if we were the only two men in the world. Two mirrors, face to face, my reflection in yours, yours in mine, infinite. I knew since I knew you, but we couldn't. I caught the sunlight pining through the shears, traveling millions of dark miles simply to graze your skin. As I did that first dawn, I studied you, sleeping beside me. I counted your eyelashes, read your dreams like butterflies flitting under your eyelids, ready to flutter into the room. Yes, I praised you like a majestic creature my God forgot to create. Till that morning of you tamed in my arms, first for me to see, name you mine. Yes, to the rise and fall of your body, your every exhale and inhale, a breath I breathed as my own, wanting to keep even the air between us. Yes, to all of you. Yes, I knew, but still, we couldn't. I taught you how to dance salsa by looking in my Caribbean eyes. You learned to speak in my tongue while teaching me how to catch a snowflake in my palms. Love the gray clouds of your worn-out hometown. Our years began collecting in glossy photos, timelining our lives across shelves and walls, glancing back at us embracing in some sunset, more captivated by each other than the sky-brushed plum rose. Us claiming some mountain that didn't matter as much as our climbing it together. Us leaning against columns of ruins as ancient as our love was new, or leaning into our dreams at a table, flickering candlelight in our full moon eyes. I knew me as much as I knew us, and yet we couldn't. Though I forgave your blue eyes turning green each time you lied, kept believing you. Though we managed to say good morning after muted nights in the same bed. Though every door slam told me to hold on by letting us go, and saying you're right became as true as saying I'm right, so there was nothing a long walk couldn't solve. Holding hands under the streetlights, lustering like a string of pearls guiding us home, or a stroll along the beach with our dog, the sea washed out by our smiles, our laughter louder than the waves. though we understood our love was the same as our parents, though we dared to tell them so, and they understood, though we knew we couldn't. No one could. When fiery kick lines and fires were set for us by our founding mother fathers at Stonewall, we first spoke of defiance. When we paraded glitter, leather, and rainbows, our word then became pride down city streets demanding just let us be. But that wasn't enough. Parades became rallies, bold words and signs, shouting until we all claimed freedom as another word for marriage and said, let us in, insisted love is love, proclaimed it into all eyes that would listen and any door that would open until no's and maybes turned into yeses, town by town, city by city, state by state, understanding us and all those who dared to say enough until the gravel stuck into law, what we always need. Love is the right to say, I do, and I do, and I do, and I do want us to see every tulip we've planted come up spring after spring. 100 more years of dinners cooked over a shared glass of wine and 1,000 more movies in bed. I do, until our eyes become voices speaking without speaking, until like a cloud meshed in clouds, there is no more you, me, our names useless. I do want you to be the last face I see, your breath, my last. I do, and will for all those who still can't vow it yet, but know love's exact reason as much as they know how a sail keeps the wind without breaking it, or how roots dig a way into the earth, or how the stars open their eyes to the night, or how a vine becomes one with the wall it loves, or how, when I hold you, you are still rain in my hands. So I thought, unless my wiki, oh, I know what I was gonna say before I forgot. So, it's more gossip than poetry. In some ways, I still, like I really had no ambition in life. I never really wanted to be anything but that 1950s housewife roasting turkeys with pearls and a plate of skirt on. I really wish it existed. So I told him, I'm not gonna propose, and he got the hint. 2 months later, he proposed. I was like, not that I don't see myself in the gender role per se, but it's just kind of like, someone's got to do it, but we kind of were waiting, and I just kind of had to tell him, I'm not going to do it. First of all, I'm too cheap to buy myself a ring. So Boston Strong, so here's another moment where some of these are not commissioned or nobody even asked it, just again, aesthetic and I look for opportunities in which I can respond to the world with poetry, right? There's poems in the book from Pulse shooting, also Parkland High School shooting. There's poems about St. Louis, there's poems about all sorts of things that nobody asked me to do, but it's like the world is giving me, the world gives us these assignments and are looking for it, so to speak. And Boston Strong was one of those moments. It really turned into this amazing sort of project in a way. We decided to make a CD, this super famous musical engineer engineered this track for free, and just all the proceeds go to the one fund. Got to spend the day with some of the survivors, and was part of that concert of the Boston Strong concert. And if I thought the inauguration was scary, try to open a concert for Bostonians who have been drinking for a couple hours. And they're ready to see Steven Tyler. Okay. I was like, this was just gonna go over like that. Like, get off the stage, like, and not to toot my own horn, it's all like, you know, of course, I always hear my songs would be 20 times better than what they are. But what really just was just one of those moments where I lived this moment. You could hear a pin drop because what was needed and what was expected was poetry. And it was almost like a prayer. It was like this. I've never seen Bostonians so quiet. And so it really was a lesson for myself to think about why not? You know, why can't poetry be again part of the space? And I've been thinking, you know, of contacting musicians and saying, let's work on a poem that we can read at the concert. Let's try to interpret something that you would like the audience to know about. Or we can do like a set or break. I don't need to read it, just have someone else read it. Let's write something like that. So anyway, yeah, Steven Tyler, what's his name? Carole King, all those people. I was just so intimidating, and I was just so proud for poetry that day. And he brought us together in a whole different way. So yeah, I'd just like to share that with you. If I'm not mistaken, and that is not you're wrong. You know, a long road trip lately, but the anniversary's around the corner. So let's think about that and read this in honor and in remembrance. Except I need to come back to that. I'm missing a page. Darn it. I'll come back to that. Sorry. I'll read from the book. Here, can't get my phone. Sometimes I turn it out. This is what happens when you refuse to admit that you need glasses. All right, 64. Remembering Boston strong. Years from now, you wish all you remember was how spring arrived just as you expected. The icicles gone as magically as they had appeared. The snow seeped back into the earth just as you had trusted it would. The thawed Charles and the river of runners ribboning that morning through the city that was a city long before our nation was a nation. While the ivy scribbled, climbed, turning green the red bricks your great-grandfathers laid. Memories mortared in every city wall and chimney. But years from now, you'll still remember this, the unexpected smoke that wasn't the spring fog. Pink purple blossoms mingled with the sparkle of shattered glass strewn over Boston Street, bursting red. Red maples and tiny leaves opening like newborn hands to cup April's rain. The lives of two girls with names as pretty as Mayflowers who would never bloom. The irony of the race ending in the mangled feet and legs of those wheeled away by those who did not run away. And the boy, the son, everyone's son, his life outlived by the budding tulips of window boxes, dressing up the city, suddenly frozen in spring. Daylight each day a few minutes longer, but baseball diamonds dulled and muted. The sky each day a tint bluer, but stadiums abandoned, every seat an empty nest. The wind each day a hint warmer, but park benches cold and quiet. Swings like pendulums stopped. Each night crickets louder in your ears, but winter set still in your eyes, caught in the glow of television sets, casting shadows of the news across living rooms and hollow city streets locked down in silence. And years from now, what you'll mostly want to remember is not the shootout that ended the silent waiting, nor the bombers' names, nor the blasts, but the tender roses you laid across the finish line, the thankful praise you gave for the lives that saved lives in their arms, the brave promises of those who vowed to walk, dance, and run again, the stadiums and ballparks again filled with anthems sung by you, like 1,000 songbirds at once, a chorus into a second spring you had not expected. Dandelions still pushing through pavement cracks, spiders still spinning, forsythia still bursting yellow, elms still growing taller, and ivy still climbing the enduring walls of the city. Still a city, but a whole lot stronger. What time is it? Sure. Yes. So I'm going to leave you in a space that's, as Richard said, what is it? You want the book? A book that people regret reading. I took it as a very positive comment. I think it was very sarcastic, but I thought you meant like a book that really unsettles you, that you almost use something the way you wish you didn't read. Something is like it ruffles some feathers and something. Is that what you meant? So I'm going to leave you in that space, which is not usually my style, but okay, I'm hungry. So this is the site of this is one of Jacob's photographs again. This is the site of the present day photo of the site of the last recorded lynching in the United States. The year of which will surprise you, but it's part of the poem. So one of the things that this book does, or this as I was saying, this whole sort of way I'm thinking about a poem or what a poem can do, is that it's giving me permission to write things that I never gave myself permission to, that I always felt I was appropriating, or that I couldn't write about, or that how dare I, or how could I speak to anything else except my own experience, my own firsthand experience. And what I learned is that it's kind of selfish. And that I think we're still trying to have a dialogue in poetry. This is a conversation in creative writing right now. I think it's all about intent, how you write about it, right? And certainly there are subjects that we are not, again, well, I should say it is intent. It's like, from what space are you writing from? So if you limit me to say that I can only write about being a little chubby, gay, Cuban American kid that grew up in a suburb behind a bowling alley in Miami, that is in a way limiting my freedom of speech. And the president of Pan America, sorry, kind of worldwide right now, is thinking about these things and realizing how can what we haven't done is we don't have enough practice in terms of speaking for and about issues that are necessarily our issues. And it's part of the problem with our democracy as well, is that we're just one issue voters, right? Well, as long as it's good for me, who cares about the rest of it, right? And so that's part of the issue we're having. Anyway, obviously this poem is about race. It's a question that I have to deal with in a very different way as a white man of color, as a culture of color. I can pass, so to speak, but I'm also from a whole other space and a whole other relationship to race than what might look like on the outside. But also, aren't we all in some ways responsible to speak about race? Right?
Yeah.
Isn't it that little, when you stay quiet in the elevator when someone makes some dumb remark, right? Or something your grandfather used to say, it still says probably, and you kind of keep quiet. This poem is about how the negative space in this photo, and thinking about how easily it's the question that America just has to deal with, and just refuses to deal. And we obviously see this with Charlottesville. We obviously see this as something we still need to deal with, right? And part of it is how easily we can think that everything is fine because we live in a penthouse or even a basement apartment in Boston or New York City, or because we live in bubbled worlds, right? And how easily we can sort of just forget that this is still a big question that we need to speak of for ourselves, right? So anyway, how race, I guess, can occupy this negative space that sometimes we don't see it and sometimes we don't respond to it. All right, and then I'll close on this. Easy lynching on Herndon Avenue. What I'd rather not see isn't here. No rope, no black body under a white moon swaying limb from a tree, no bloody drops of dew on the 21st of March, 1981. That's in another photo. Like a dozen other photos I've gaped at, wanting, not wanting to turn away from the snap necks of the hang. And the small, smug smirks, asking myself, how could they? Why? Question is not here, not in this photo. A crisp and tranquil snapshot, murder washed out by time, history left uncaptured. What's left now is easier on our eyes. Only pale morning light seeping blue into the sky, a backdrop to the necks of the tree boughs bowing like swans, innocent of any crime on Herndon Avenue, pictured like any other street. Clean sidewalks, no blood, utility poles strung with wires, no rope, a few pavement cracks, no broken bone body. Easier to imagine only this. Groomed children waiting for the school bus grinding to a halt that March morning, the 21st, 1981. Their backpacks zipped with undoubtable history and equations, cartoon lunchboxes filled with fresh ham sandwiches and sweet grapes. Sport coat fathers dashing for work, worried about paychecks in the greenness of their lawns. All-day mothers left tending silks, pillows never fluffed enough, scrubbing sinks never white enough, wiping windows never spotless enough. Easier not to ask if anyone saw him, if anyone knew the boy whose mama had named Michael Donald. Easier to think no one was friendly with Mr. Hayes and Mr. Knowles, who, on the night of March 21st, 1981, drove around looking for something black to kill. They spotted him, age 19, walking home. The body strangled him first, then slit his throat. The blood chose a tree to hang him. The rope, Herndon Avenue, 1981. Why? Which tree was it that shook with his last breath? Easier not to look for it, not find it, not make ourselves imagine Michael still hanging on Herndon Avenue. His death still alive since March 21st, 1981. Easier not to look at his shut eyes, wonder what his favorite color or superhero was, if he liked to skateboard or draw, if he heard his mama's cries. My boy, Jesus, my boy. Easier to believe the last words on the lips of his murderers must have been, forgive us. To trust this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Stay blind, no rope, no blood, no body. To the life of a boy named Michael, invisible in this photo. That is, until we dare to look long and deep and hard enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your deepest and most sincere feelings about the country and about yourself. And it certainly enlightens, the truth for all of us. So, I'd like to invite you all upstairs now for a reception and a book signing and some coffee with Richard Blanco. head upstairs. Washburn. Thank you.